Hi there, thanks for checking out my channel and my latest Diablo 4 video in my continued series focused on one skill builds. This time around, we're going with the Necromancer. I originally wanted to do a reap only build, but saw someone had done a similar build with more than one skill and got to like tier 110 of the pit. So, I decided I want to try something a bit different and, in my opinion, more challenging. Decompose. So Decompose is a channeled Necromancer darkness basic skill. It's a weird offensive skill in that it's slow, like really slow. You channel the skill, and then you watch as it slowly drains HP from enemies. The key for Decompose, however, are the various modifiers, the most important of which are Enhanced Decompose and Acolytes Decompose. Enhanced creates a small explosion when either the target enemy dies, or you create a corpse from the attack. Acolytes Decompose amps up the damage by making enemies vulnerable if they're struck by that explosion. There's also an Initiates Decompose that slows enemies and gives you movement speed, but I didn't opt to use that modifier during this run. Overall, it's not the most exciting skill out there, but it does have an ace up its sleeve, the Rotting aspect. The Rotting aspect essentially allows you to chain the attack to 2 additional enemies with a damage multiplier for the explosion effect. This is where the large majority of decomposed damage comes from, and during the run I had to work pretty hard in order to find out what other skills, aspects, and other gear would synergize with that powerful, albeit very slow, method of attack. So without further ado, let's dive into the gear I used during the run. And as a reminder, this run was done using only Decompose, namely only having that one skill in my skill bar. I didn't use any runes, didn't use mercenaries, and didn't use any seasonal powers or seasonal gems. To make up for an almost total lack of elemental damage native to the Necromancer class, besides Shadow, I was going to have to get creative in terms of how I was going to enhance my damage potential. For my helmet, I opted to go with the Air of Perdition. While it doesn't help me deal direct damage or kill enemies faster, it's hard to deny the usefulness of critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and movement speed. Sadly, the extra ranks to core skills were going to be useless to me, but the overall 60 times damage buff was going to be super useful. For my chest armor, I chose the Shroud of False Death, largely for the all stats and max life affixes, as well as the very important +1 to all passive skills, which results in a noticeable damage boost. My gloves, I wanted to keep amping up that critical strike chance and lucky hit chance, so naturally the best choice for me to use were the Fists of Fate. I'll get into it a little bit more on why they were so important, but right now, let's keep it at that. My boots were all about more synergy, and my choice was the Penitent Greaves, mainly because it was setting me up to have massive damage down the road thanks to its chill slow potency, and the extra movement speed didn't hurt. While I initially tried to make Azarath work on this build, and to take advantage of its crazy chill damage, I ultimately decided the damage just wasn't good enough, and I remembered that I could actually get a ton of chill damage and shatter damage from one weapon. So instead, I opted to use the Bloodless Scream. The 8+ ranks to darkness skills were a nice bonus for sure. However, the affix granting extra shatter damage on lucky hit added a ton of potential damage, especially when it was a greater affix and raised the bonus damage to over 30,000, up from around the normal range of 3,000. On top of that, the weapon also allowed all of my darkness skills to inflict chill. This automatically made using Azarath kind of a moot point, since I was even getting more potential damage from Bloodless Scream. I'm going to skip around a bit and talk about the amulet I used, as it was probably one of the most important pieces of gear I used during this run, thanks to its aspect. Since I was only able to use Decompose, I initially thought I'd be out of luck when it came to using things like curses. Those are usually a huge part of any Necromancer build. However, the Cursed Auras aspect gave me not only 1, but 2 curses at the same time, Iron Maiden and Decrepify. Super useful. And better yet, it also chained both curses to other nearby enemies that were in close proximity to me. For extra damage, I added extra ranks to Gloom. That's 8% X more shatter damage, and tempers for both darkness damage and Decompose explosion size to make sure I was hitting as many enemies as possible with every attack. Rings are a bit weird on runs like these, mainly because I almost never use any resource. Rings, when tempered, can pick from both the offensive and resource temper groups, making the latter basically useless for me in these kinds of runs. So I wasn't planning on masterworking this ring anyways, so all I did was throw on the rotting aspect to ensure that my Decompose was chaining to more enemies, and added on a temper to do explosion damage. My last ring, again going with the focus on critical strike chance and lucky hit, is naturally the Ring of Starless Skies. In total, this build ran with about a 100% critical strike chance and a 198% lucky hit chance, guaranteeing that pretty much every single attack I used was hitting for both shadow damage and ice damage, turning most groups of enemies into immobile blocks of ice before I killed them. This time around, I won't be going over my Paragon board for one simple reason. I barely used it. While I did have Paragon points that I allocated to various boards, I actually only used one glyph because I forgot to level up the others. So, we're just going to skip that part. If you really want to know the exact setup I used on my boards, leave a comment and I can drop a link to a build guide. The same goes for the specific skills and passives. So, with that said, the Decomposed Necromancer was a really fun run. It was certainly challenging, probably more challenging than the other runs I've done. But there's something satisfying about channeling Decompose and watching it kind of go hit, 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 and then pop with a big burst of damage. It's like pumping up a dark, shadowy balloon that kills stuff. So, please enjoy the build in action as I run through a Tier 55 Torment 4 pit. Thanks a lot for watching.